The bullies assumed he was just another easy target until they went too far and discovered his deadly secret. Mark Dawson kept his head low as he made his way down the main hallway of Westfield High, clutching his worn leather messenger bag tightly against his chest. At 17, he barely measured 5 feet 6 inches, with a slim build that made him look younger than his age. His dark hair fell over his forehead, partly hiding the quiet sharpness in his brown eyes. It had been 3 months since his family relocated from Montreal to this small town in Pennsylvania, and Mark still felt like a stranger in unfamiliar surroundings. The corridors buzzed with typical teenage energy, but Mark moved through them like a shadow. His accent, subtle but evident, marked him as different. His preference for keeping to himself and reading during lunch made him an easy mark for bullies. What none of his peers knew was that Mark had spent the past 8 years training in mixed martial arts with some of Quebec's most renowned coaches. His father, a former military officer, had insisted on the training after Mark was seriously injured in a cruel attack at the age of 9. The discipline, control, and deadly skill were all there beneath his calm exterior. Yet Mark had made a promise to his mother after they moved. No more fighting, no more violence. She had witnessed too much of what her son was capable of, and it frightened her deeply. Violence only. She had murmured through tears that violence only leads to more violence after Mark Dawson landed 3 teenagers in the hospital in Montreal. He promised to change and seek a different path. However, his determination was challenged every day by Tyler Benson and his gang. Tyler towered 6 feet 2 inches with broad shoulders shaped by hours spent in the gym. His sandy hair was always immaculate, and his green eyes shone with a cold cunning that made him especially dangerous. He ruled Westfield High through fear and instantly marked Mark as his target. Jake Morgan acted as Tyler's right-hand man, shorter but more solidly built, his face seemingly frozen in a permanent sneer. The third accomplice was Danny Walker, tall and anxious, who joined more out of terror than true cruelty. Together, they transformed Mark's existence into a daily trial filled with humiliation. The torment started subtly with shoulder bumps in the hallways that sent Mark crashing into lockers, books spilling from his hands, whispered slurs about his accent, calling him Frenchie and refugee. Mark bore it all quietly, jaw tight, but never retaliated. The cafeteria turned into a frequent battlefield. Westfield High's lunchroom spanned half the main building and was full of long tables that naturally divided different social circles. Mark always sat alone at a small table by the windows, hoping to stay unnoticed. However, Tyler's group had different intentions. "Hey, Frenchie," Tyler called out one Tuesday afternoon, his voice carrying through the bustling area. "Are you going to finish that entire sandwich, or are you saving some for your mom back in Canada?" Laughter echoed from nearby tables. Mark kept eating, his gaze locked on his book, but his knuckles tightened white around his sandwich. "Control," he told himself. "Mom is right. Violence will not solve anything." Jake stepped closer, casting his shadow over Mark's table. "Tyler is talking to you, foreign boy. It's rude not to respond." "Leave me alone," Mark said softly, his accent thickening under pressure. "Oh, he talks," Danny chuckled nervously. "What's that book about? How to surrender in French?" The joke fell flat. Nevertheless, Tyler grabbed the book, flipping through the pages with exaggerated curiosity. "Advanced Physics," he read out loud. "Good grief, Frenchie. No wonder you have no friends. You read this boring stuff for fun." Mark reached for the book, but Tyler raised it high. "Give it back," Mark said firmly, despite the anger swelling inside him. "Make me," Tyler smirked, then purposely dropped the book into Mark's chocolate milk. The liquid splashed across the table, soaking into Mark's notebook and dripping onto his jeans. The cafeteria went silent, dozens of eyes fixed on the tense scene. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch supervisor, was conveniently looking elsewhere. On the other side, engrossed in her phone, Mark Dawson gazed at his ruined possessions, his breathing carefully measured. "This is precisely what they want," he thought. "They want me to lose control." However, Mark calmly picked up his soaked book and started tidying the mess. Tyler Benson's group chuckled and walked away, disappointed by the absence of a reaction. Yet Mark noticed something in Tyler's eyes that disturbed him. The satisfaction was incomplete. The tormentor desired more. The incidents intensified over the next weeks. During gym class, Mark found his clothes slashed in his locker. While heading to his car after school, he saw that all 4 tires had been cut. The school authorities remained frustratingly indifferent, treating each event as a mere prank instead of recognizing a pattern of bullying. "Boys will be boys," Principal Davidson said dismissively when Mark's father came to complain. "Mark needs to adjust better, perhaps by joining more school activities." Mark's father left the meeting enraged, but Mark persuaded him not to push it further. "I can handle this," he said, although inside he questioned how much more he could endure. The breaking point happened on a Thursday morning in Mrs. Rodriguez's advanced biology lesson. She was young, likely in her late 20s, with long dark hair and a dedication to teaching that made her well liked by students. She wore a modest skirt reaching her knees and a blouse. Mark Dawson had always valued her warmth. She was among the rare teachers who truly seemed invested in how he adapted to the unfamiliar school environment. The classroom was situated on the 2nd floor of the science wing, featuring large panes that looked out over the car park. Mrs. Rodriguez stood at the front, busy inscribing chemical equations on the whiteboard when Tyler Benson decided to act. "Check this out," Tyler murmured to Jake Morgan, who was sitting 2 rows behind Mark. "I bet she has something daring beneath that skirt." Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. He had come to recognize that tone in Tyler's voice, the threatening delight that usually came before his worst antics. Mrs. Rodriguez faced the board, stretching upward to write on its upper section. Tyler rose slowly, performing silent, exaggerated signals to his companions. A few students noticed, silently watching with a mix of shock and expectancy. Tyler advanced carefully, his phone already recording. Jake trailed him, grinning foolishly. Danny Walker remained seated, uneasy but unwilling to step in. "Do something," Mark wished frantically. But how? Calling out would only catch Tyler's attention and put Mark himself in the spotlight. Staying silent meant Mrs. Rodriguez would suffer humiliation. Tyler arrived at the front and hesitantly reached toward the edge of Mrs. Rodriguez's skirt. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. "What on earth do you think you are doing? What are you doing?" Mrs. Rodriguez turned around just as Tyler's fingers brushed the fabric. Her voice cut through the classroom sharply like a crack of thunder. Her usual kindness was replaced by fierce anger. Tyler froze, his hand still raised and his phone still recording. You were just sexually harassing your teacher," Mrs. Rodriguez declared, her tone chillingly calm. "Hand over that phone immediately." "I do not think so." Tyler grinned, regaining his confidence. "You cannot prove a thing. Besides, what will you do about it? You are only a teacher. That is when he made a grave error." Mrs. Rodriguez reacted instantly, her hand shooting out to seize Tyler's wrist. The phone slipped from his grasp and bounced loudly across the floor. Tyler tried to escape, but found himself caught in a firm hold. "Release me, you mad woman." Mrs. Rodriguez twisted Tyler's arm behind his back and forced him face down onto the closest desk. The collision echoed powerfully in the quiet room. Tyler screamed out in pain and shock. "Does anyone else want to try their luck?" she asked calmly, pressing her knee into Tyler's back as he twisted helplessly. "Jake? You were videotaping as well, were you not?" Jake went pale, his hands trembling around his phone. "I was not. We were just Mrs. Rodriguez dropped Tyler, who staggered backwards, clutching his injured arm. Her eyes blazed with justified fury. "All 3 of you get out of my classroom immediately and do not even consider returning until you have learned your lesson. To treat women with dignity." Tyler's face burned with both shame and fury. The entire classroom had seen him defeated by a woman half his stature. While collecting his scattered belongings, his gaze locked onto Mark Dawson. "This is somehow your fault," he muttered angrily. "After school, Frenchie parking lot, you and me," Tyler threatened. Mark sensed a change inside, a crack forming in the strict control he had maintained for months. Tyler's menacing words extended beyond just himself. Mrs. Rodriguez had stood her ground, displaying genuine bravery, and now Tyler aimed to vent his frustration on the one person he believed powerless to resist. But he was mistaken. The remainder of the day slipped by in a haze. Mark struggled to focus during lessons as his thoughts spun with various outcomes and repercussions. He could avoid the confrontation, leave school early, or arrange a ride home. He might also report Tyler's menace to the school officials, although their history suggested little action would follow. Or perhaps it was time to finally reveal to Tyler Benson who he really was facing. When the last bell rang, Mark did not join the crowd exiting the building. Instead, he calmly headed to his locker, moving with intent. He cleared out his heavy textbooks, keeping only a notebook and pen. His movements carried a fresh confidence and purpose, a subtle yet visible shift to any observer. Sarah Martinez, a quiet girl from his chemistry class, paused at the locker beside his. "Mark," she said with hesitation. "Tyler Benson and his friends are waiting outside. Maybe you should call your parents or something." Mark looked at her, truly looking for the first time. She had gentle eyes and appeared genuinely worried. "Thank you," he replied simply. "But I believe it is time I face this on my own." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean, Mark?" Tyler, who was very tall, added in a threatening tone. "He will hurt you." A small smile appeared at the edges of Mark's lips. "I don't think so." He walked through the school's main hallways one last time as someone about to be victimized. Students passed by in the usual after-school hurry, but many had already heard about Tyler's warning. News traveled quickly in a small school, and a crowd was already forming outside. The parking area stretched behind the main building, bordered by a chain-link fence and overlooked by the gym windows. It was the typical place to settle conflicts far enough from the main offices to avoid immediate involvement from the administration, but still visible enough for witnesses. Tyler stood near the center of the lot with Jake Morgan and Danny Walker beside him. A group of about 30 students had gathered in a loose circle, keeping enough distance to quickly disperse if school staff appeared, but close enough to watch everything unfold. Mark noticed Mrs. Rodriguez's car parked in the faculty lot and wondered if she realized what was about to take place. "There he is, Tyler," Tyler Benson shouted as Mark Dawson drew near, mocking him as the timid Frenchman who hides behind women. Mark advanced calmly, his arms relaxed at his sides, breathing steady and mind-focused. 8 years of discipline had taught him to find peace amid disorder. "You embarrassed me today, Frenchie," Tyler yelled louder to catch the crowd's attention. "You made me look like a fool in front of everyone. That was a grave error." Mark stopped about 10 feet away, close enough for either to strike. "I did nothing to you, Tyler. You humiliated yourself," he said evenly. Tyler scowled, clearly irritated. "Smart mouth. Let's see how smart you are when I'm finished with you," he growled, lunging forward with a wild, clumsy haymaker aimed at Mark's head. This sloppy, telegraphed attack was exactly the kind Mark had been trained to counter from his first month in training. Mark easily dodged with minimal motion, allowing Tyler's own momentum to carry him forward. As Tyler stumbled past, Mark slammed an elbow into his side. Tyler gasped and staggered, a sharp pain shooting through his lower back. The crowd fell silent. This was no accident. Tyler whirled around, rage and confusion twisting his face. "Lucky shot," he snarled, though his voice lacked certainty. He came at Mark again, this time with caution, throwing a series of jabs. Mark flowed smoothly like water, each punch slipping harmlessly past him. He could have finished it there, could have ended the fight immediately. Mark did not knock Tyler down with countless ruthless counterattacks. Instead, he allowed the bully to tire himself out, proving how pointless his assaults were. Jake, noticing his leader struggling, attempted to step in. He charged at Mark from the side, hoping to surprise him. Mark's reaction was quick and unforgiving. He caught Jake's forward momentum with a perfectly timed hip throw, utilizing the boy's own force to send him crashing onto the pavement. Jake rolled twice before coming to rest against a parked vehicle, groaning with pain. "Stay down," Mark whispered without taking his eyes off Tyler. Danny glanced at his friends and slowly stepped back, raising his hands in surrender. "I'm out," he declared quickly. This is between you two. Tyler was now breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his brow. For the first time, a flicker of real fear shone in his eyes. This isn't going as planned, he admitted. What exactly are you? He gasped. Mark began to circle him, his movements sharp and calculated. I'm someone who has been extremely patient with you, Tyler. Someone who gave you every opportunity to leave me alone. Someone whose mother made him promise not to cause harm. Tyler flung out another punch, desperation clouding his precision. Mark caught his wrist, twisted it, and drove his knee into Tyler's solar plexus. The larger boy doubled over, gasping for air. But you just couldn't leave it be, could you? Mark spoke calmly, still holding onto Tyler's arm. You had to push further, had to humiliate Mrs. Rodriguez had to threaten me. He twisted Tyler's arm further, putting pressure on the shoulder joint, and Tyler cried out, sinking down to one knee. I have been practicing mixed martial arts since I was 9 years old, said Mark Dawson, his voice carrying boldly through the quiet parking lot. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, 8 years, 6 days a week, 3 hours each day. I have taken part in competitions all across Canada and the northern United States. I have never lost a fight. Tyler's eyes grew wide with fear now, finally grasping how serious his mistake was. Mark continued. The last 3 boys who tried to intimidate me ended up in the hospital. One had a broken jaw. Another suffered 3 cracked ribs. The third ended up with a dislocated shoulder and a concussion. Mark paused, then added, That is why my family relocated here. That is why I promised my mother I would never fight again. He let go of Tyler's arm and stepped back. Tyler collapsed completely to the ground, clutching his shoulder and gasping for air. But you had to push it, Mark said, disappointment heavy in his voice. You could not just leave me in peace. You had to drag Mrs. Rodriguez into this. You had to make it personal. Tyler struggled to rise, his complexion pale and defeated. I am sorry, he whispered. I did not know. I will leave you alone, I swear. Mark observed him silently for a long moment. Around them, the onlookers watched with a mixture of intrigue and fear. This quiet boy, once a victim, was someone they had all seen tormented before. For several months, Mark Dawson had just taken down the school's most dreaded bully without even breaking a sweat. You are not sorry yet, Mark said at last, but soon you will be. He moved with lightning-quick speed, his fist striking Tyler Benson's jaw with a flawless right cross. The sound of the hit echoed through the parking lot like a shot fired. Tyler's head jerked backward, his eyes rolled upwards, and he collapsed unconscious onto the asphalt. The crowd burst into shocked murmurs and nervous chuckles. Jake Morgan was still groaning against the car, clutching his ribs. Danny Walker had vanished without a trace. Tyler lay motionless, a thin line of blood dripping from his split lip. Mark stood over his fallen adversary, breathing calmly. He felt no joy or triumph, only a profound sadness that things had reached this point. Is he dead? Someone whispered among the onlookers. Mark knelt down and checked Tyler's pulse, which was strong and steady. He is fine, Mark called out. Just knocked out. He will wake up in a few minutes with a headache and a lesson learned. He stood and faced the watching students. Does anyone else have a problem with me? He asked quietly. The crowd began dispersing swiftly, students scrambling to share what they had just seen. Within moments, only a few remained. Sarah Martinez stepped forward cautiously. Mark, are you okay? She asked. He looked at her, this kind girl who had tried to warn him. I am fine, he replied, but I am not the same person I was this morning. Tyler began to stir, groaning softly. Mark Dawson helped him sit up, ignoring the boy's natural recoil. Listen carefully, Mark said, his tone soft yet resolute. This stops right here. No retaliation, no revenge, no more bullying anyone. You will leave me alone. You will leave everyone else alone, and you will remember this feeling next time you consider picking on someone smaller than you. Tyler Benson nodded weakly, unable to meet Mark's gaze. And Mark added, "If I hear about you troubling Mrs. Rodriguez or any other teacher, or if I find out you are bothering any other students, we will have this conversation again, except next time I will not be so gentle." By Monday morning, the news had spread across Westfield High like wildfire. Mark arrived to find students watching him with a mix of respect and fear. The quiet kid who had once been a victim had transformed completely. Returning to school with a bruised jaw and a greatly changed demeanor, Tyler avoided Mark entirely, kept his head down during lessons, and seemed to have lost any desire for conflict. Jake Morgan and Danny Walker followed suit, and their group quietly dissolved. Mrs. Rodriguez found Mark before the first period. "I have heard," she said softly. "What happened?" "Thank you for standing up for me." "You stood up for yourself?" Mark replied. "I just finished what you started," she smiled. "Still, I truly appreciate it. And Mark, if you ever need someone to talk to about what you can do, I am here." Mark Dawson nodded with gratitude. It felt good to realize he was not completely by himself. The transformation was swift and striking. Students who had previously ignored him now gave him respectful nods in the corridors. Teachers began treating him with newfound respect. The invisible wall that had encased him for months was fully broken. Yet, perhaps the most important change was within Mark himself. He no longer kept his gaze low or tried to stay unnoticed. He moved with quiet assurance, confident he could face anything ahead. He still promised his mother he would avoid violence or become someone he despised, but he would never let himself be anyone's target again. About 3 weeks later, Tyler Benson came over to him after class. Mark stiffened, bracing for whatever might come. But Tyler's demeanor was submissive and regretful. "I wanted to say sorry," Tyler said softly. "Really? Apologize? What I did to Mrs. Rodriguez, what I did to you, was wrong. I was wrong." Mark carefully examined the older boy's expression, searching for deceit. Instead, he saw pure sincerity. "Apology accepted," Mark finally replied. "But Tyler, this doesn't mean we are friends. This just evens the score." Tyler nodded in understanding. "I get it. And Mark, I am not the only one who learned a lesson that day. Half the school witnessed the consequences of pushing someone too far. You probably stopped many others from getting hurt." As Tyler walked away, the weight of his words lingered. Mark Dawson pondered the reality in those words. At times, aggression was not the solution, yet occasionally it remained the sole language that tormentors recognized. The challenge lay in discerning the moments to stand firm and the moments to step back. His mother had been correct in saying that violence generates more violence, but she had also been mistaken about one crucial thing. Occasionally, a single justified instance of firmness could stop a greater amount of conflict from erupting in the future. The bullies assumed he was just another victim until they pushed too far and encountered his dangerous secret. Mark Dalton kept his head low as he walked down the main hallway of Westfield High School, clutching his worn leather messenger bag tightly to his chest. At 17 years old, he measured hardly 5 feet 6 inches, with a slender build that made him look younger than his age. His dark hair fell over his forehead, partially hiding the calm intelligence in his brown eyes. It had been 3 months since his family relocated from Montreal to this quiet town in Pennsylvania, and Mark still felt like a stranger trying to find his place in a new world. The hallways buzzed with the usual teenage noise, yet Mark moved through them like a shadow. His accent, subtle but clear, set him apart. His love for solitude and the habit of reading during lunch broke the rhythm of the typical student, making him vulnerable to teasing. What none of his peers realized was that Mark had dedicated the last 8 years to mastering mixed martial arts under some of the top trainers in Quebec. His father, a former military officer, had insisted on the rigorous training after Mark had been hospitalized from a vicious assault at the age of 9. The discipline, control, and deadly accuracy were all there, concealed under his calm facade. However, Mark had made a solemn vow to his mother after their move to this new place. No more fighting, no more violence. She had witnessed too much of what her son could do, and it frightened her deeply. Violence only breeds more violence. She had murmured through tears after Mark Dalton had sent 3 teenagers to the hospital back in Montreal. He had promised to change, to seek a different path. That promise was challenged every day by Tyler Brooks and his gang. Tyler stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with broad shoulders, shaped by countless hours in the gym. His sandy hair was always neatly styled, and his green eyes held a sharp cruelty that made him especially dangerous. He dominated Westfield High through fear and quickly singled out Mark as a target. Jack Morgan acted as Tyler's right hand, shorter but stockier, with a face permanently contorted into a sneer. The third in their group was Danny Wallace, lanky and anxious, more driven by fear than true cruelty. Together, they transformed Mark's existence into a daily ordeal filled with humiliation. It began with minor provocations. Shoulder bumps in the hallways that made Mark stumble into lockers, accidentally scattering his books, hushed insults about his accent, calling him Frenchie and refugee. Mark tolerated it all silently, his jaw tight but his fists never raised. The cafeteria became a focal point for their torment. Westfield High's lunchroom spanned half the main building, crowded with long tables that naturally divided students into social groups. Mark always chose to sit alone at a small table by the windows, striving to go unnoticed. However, Tyler's group had different intentions. "Hey, Frenchie," Tyler shouted one Tuesday afternoon, his voice echoing throughout the bustling room. "Are you going to finish that whole sandwich or save some for your mom back in Canada?" Laughter spread among the nearby tables. Mark kept eating, eyes glued to his book, but his knuckles clenched so tightly around his sandwich that they turned pale. "Stay calm," he told himself. "Mom is right. Fighting is never the solution." Jack moved closer, his shadow looming over Mark's table. "Tyler was addressing you, foreign boy. It's impolite not to respond. Leave me alone," Mark muttered quietly, his accent becoming stronger as his stress increased. "Oh, he talks," Danny chuckled nervously. "What's that book about? How to give up in French?" The joke fell flat. Yet Tyler grabbed the book anyway, flipping through its pages with fake curiosity. "Advanced Physics?" he read aloud. "No wonder you have no friends. You read this dull stuff for fun?" Mark reached for the book, but Tyler lifted it out of reach. "Give it back," Mark said firmly, even though anger surged inside him. "Make me." Tyler smirked, and then deliberately dropped the book into Mark's chocolate milk. The liquid splashed over the table, soaking Mark's notebook and dripping onto his pants. The cafeteria fell silent, dozens of eyes fixed on the tense scene. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch supervisor, conveniently looked away. Mark Dalton sat quietly, absorbed in his phone, while staring at his damaged possessions, his breathing deliberately steady. He thought, "This is exactly what they want. They want me to lose control." Nonetheless, Mark calmly picked up his soaked book and began tidying the mess. Tyler Brooks's group laughed and soon walked away, disappointed by his lack of reaction. However, Mark noticed something unsettling in Tyler's eyes. The satisfaction was not complete. The bully craved more. The harassment intensified over the next few weeks. During gym class, Mark found his clothes shredded in his locker. On his way to the car after school, he discovered all 4 tires had been slashed. The school officials were frustratingly indifferent, dismissing each episode as mere isolated pranks instead of recognizing a pattern of systematic bullying. "Boys will be boys," Principal Davidson had said with a dismissive wave when Mark's father came to complain. Mark needed to fit in better, perhaps by joining more school activities. Mark's father left the meeting angry, but Mark persuaded him not to push the matter further. "I can manage this," he said, although privately he wondered how much more abuse he could endure. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday morning during Mrs. Rodriguez's advanced biology class. She was a young teacher in her late 20s, with long dark hair and an enthusiasm for education that made her very popular with students. She dressed modestly in a skirt reaching her knees and a blouse. Mark Dalton had always admired her warmth and kindness. She was among the rare teachers who truly seemed invested in helping him settle into the new school environment. The classroom was located on the second floor of the science building, featuring large windows that looked out over the parking area. Mrs. Rodriguez stood at the front, busily writing chemical formulas on the whiteboard when Tyler Brooks decided to act. "Look at this," Tyler whispered to Jack Morgan, who sat 2 rows behind Mark. "I bet she's wearing something interesting beneath that skirt." Mark felt a sudden knot in his stomach. He had come to understand that tone in Tyler's voice too well. The cruel delight that always preceded the worst of his actions. Mrs. Rodriguez had her back turned, reaching up to write on a high part of the board. Slowly, Tyler began to stand up, making exaggerated, subtle signals to his friends. Several students caught on but remained silent, their eyes wide with a mix of dread and expectation. Tyler crept closer, his phone already recording. Jack followed him, grinning foolishly. Danny Wallace stayed seated, visibly uneasy but unwilling to get involved. Desperately, Mark thought. Do something. But he was frozen. Speaking out would only draw Tyler's attention to him. Yet staying silent meant Mrs. Rodriguez would be embarrassed. Reaching the front, Tyler slowly extended his hand toward the hem of Mrs. Rodriguez's skirt. The entire class held its breath. "What do you think you are doing?" Mark wanted to scream inside. "What are you doing?" Mrs. Rodriguez turned around just as Tyler's fingers barely touched the fabric. Her voice sliced through the classroom like a whip. The gentle tone she usually had was replaced by fiery anger. Tyler froze, his hands still raised, his phone still recording. You were just sexually harassing your teacher," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice deadly calm. "Hand me that phone immediately." "I don't think so," Tyler smirked, regaining his confidence. "You can't prove anything. Besides, what can you do? You're only a teacher." That was his fatal error. Mrs. Rodriguez moved with lightning speed, her hand shooting out to grasp Tyler's wrist. The phone flew from his grip, clattering against the floor. Tyler tried to pull away but was caught in a vice grip. "Let me go, you crazy!" Mrs. Rodriguez twisted Tyler's arm behind his back and slammed him face first into the nearest desk. The sound echoed in the silent room. Tyler cried out in pain and shock. "Anyone else want to try something?" she said casually, pressing her knee into Tyler's back as he struggled helplessly. "Jack, you were filming as well, weren't you?" Jack turned pale, his phone shaking in his hands. "I wasn't. We were just—" Mrs. Rodriguez released Tyler, who staggered back clutching his arm. Her eyes burned with fierce anger. "All 3 of you get out of my classroom now and don't even consider coming back until you have learned." Tyler Brooks's face was burning with a mixture of shame and anger. Everyone in the classroom had seen him lose to a woman half his size. As he gathered his belongings scattered across the floor, his gaze landed on Mark Dalton. "This is your fault somehow," he muttered quietly. "After school, Frenchy parking lot, you and me," he threatened. A strange feeling stirred in Mark's chest. The careful composure he had kept for months was starting to break down. Tyler's threat was no longer just about him. Mrs. Rodriguez had stood her ground with real bravery, and now Tyler wanted to unleash his frustration on the only person he believed could not fight back. He was completely wrong. The rest of the day felt like a whirlwind for Mark. Concentrating on his classes became nearly impossible as his mind raced through every possible outcome and consequence. He could avoid the showdown by skipping school, leaving early, or asking for a ride home. Reporting Tyler's threat to the administration was an option, yet past experiences suggested nothing effective would happen. Or finally, he could confront Tyler Brooks directly and make it clear who was really in control. When the final bell rang, Mark did not rush out with the other students. Instead, he calmly walked to his locker and removed his heavy textbooks, keeping only his notebook and pen. His movements had changed, becoming more confident and intentional. Anyone paying close attention would notice this small but significant shift. Sarah Martinez, a quiet girl from his chemistry class, paused at the locker next to his. "Mark," she said nervously, "Tyler and his friends are waiting outside." Maybe you should call your parents or something, she added. Mark looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. She had gentle eyes and seemed sincerely worried. Thank you, he responded calmly. But I believe it is time I face this on my own. Sarah frowned. What do you mean, Mark? Tyler's large figure loomed. He will hurt you. A slight smile appeared on the edges of Mark's lips. I highly doubt that. He walked through the main hallways of the school one final time as someone about to be targeted. Students hurried around him in the usual after-school rush, but quite a few had heard about Tyler's menace. Rumors spread quickly in a small school, and a crowd was already gathering outside. The parking lot extended behind the main building, enclosed by a chain-link fence and observed by the gym windows. It was the typical place for resolving conflicts, far enough from the administration offices to prevent instant intervention, yet visible enough to guarantee witnesses. Tyler stood near the center of the lot with Jack and Danny on either side. Around 30 students formed a loose circle, keeping a safe distance ready to disperse if teachers appeared, but close enough to watch everything unfold. Mark noticed Mrs. Rodriguez's car still parked in the faculty lot and wondered if she was aware of what was about to occur. That's him, Tyler. Mark Dalton was called out as he neared. The small French coward hiding behind women. Mark advanced steadily, his hands relaxed at his sides, his breathing even and his mind focused. 8 years of discipline had trained him to find calm amid chaos. You made a fool of me today, Frenchie, Tyler Brooks shouted, raising his voice to engage the crowd. You showed everyone I'm weak. That was a fatal error. Mark stopped about 10 feet away, well inside the range for both combatants. I did nothing to you, Tyler. You embarrassed yourself. Tyler's expression darkened. Clever mouth. Let's see how clever you are when I finish with you. Tyler lunged forward, throwing a wild, reckless punch aimed at Mark's head. It was exactly the sloppy, predictable attack Mark had mastered to counter in his very first month of training. Mark dodged the blow with barely any movement, allowing Tyler's weight to carry him forward. As Tyler stumbled past, Mark drove his elbow hard into his opponent's kidney. Tyler gasped sharply and stumbled, pain striking through his lower back. The crowd fell silent. That did not seem like a coincidence. Tyler spun with rage and confusion written all over his face. Lucky shot, he growled, but there was no conviction in his tone. He attacked again, this time more carefully, launching a series of jabs. Mark moved fluidly like water, each punch sliding past him without harm. He could have ended the fight right there, could have. Mark Dalton never knocked down Tyler with countless crushing counters. Instead, he allowed the bully to tire himself out, showing how meaningless his attacks were. Jack Morgan, watching his leader struggle, tried to step in. He charged at Mark from the side, aiming to catch him unprepared. Mark reacted quickly and ruthlessly. He trapped Jack's forward momentum with a flawlessly timed hip throw, using the boy's own energy to send him crashing onto the pavement. Jack tumbled twice before collapsing against a parked car, groaning in pain. Stay down, Mark said softly, never taking his eyes off Tyler. Danny Wallace glanced at his friends and withdrew, raising his hands. I'm out, he said swiftly. This is between you two. Tyler was now breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead. For the first time, real fear flickered in his gaze. This isn't going the way I expected, he thought. What on earth are you? He gasped. Mark began to move around him with calculated, predatory steps. I am someone who has exercised a lot of patience with you, Tyler. Someone who has given you every opportunity to leave me be. Someone whose mother made him promise never to hurt others. Tyler threw another desperate punch, clumsy in his panic. Mark caught his wrist, twisted it, and drove his knee into Tyler's solar plexus. The bigger boy bent over, gasping for air. But you just couldn't leave things alone, could you? Mark kept speaking calmly while holding Tyler's arm tightly. You had to keep pushing, had to humiliate Mrs. Rodriguez had no choice but to threaten me. He twisted Tyler's arm even more, putting pressure on the shoulder joint. Tyler cried out and dropped to one knee. I have been training in mixed martial arts since I was 9 years old, Mark Dalton said, his voice ringing clearly across the quiet parking lot. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling. 8 years, 6 days a week, 3 hours every day. I have competed in tournaments all over Canada and the northern United States. I have never lost a match. Tyler's eyes widened with fear now, finally realizing the full weight of what he had done wrong. Mark continued, "The last 3 boys who tried to bully me ended up in the hospital. One suffered a broken jaw, another had 3 cracked ribs, and the third had a dislocated shoulder and a concussion. That is why my family moved here. That is why I promised my mother I would not fight anymore." Mark let go of Tyler's arm and stepped back. Tyler fell completely to the ground, clutching his shoulder and gasping for air. "But you just had to push," Mark said, his voice thick with disappointment. "You could not simply leave me alone. You had to drag Mrs. Rodriguez into it. You had to make it personal." Tyler struggled to stand, his face pale and defeated. "I am sorry," he whispered quietly. "I did not know. I promise I will leave you alone." Mark looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the crowd watched with fascination and fear. This quiet kid, this target, they had all witnessed the torment he endured. For several months, Mark Dalton had just taken down the school's most infamous bully effortlessly. "You are not sorry yet," Mark finally said calmly, "but that will change." He moved with sudden power, his fist striking Tyler Brooks's jaw with a precise right cross. The sound of the blow echoed across the parking lot like a loud shot. Tyler's head jerked back, his eyes rolled upward, and he collapsed, unconscious, onto the asphalt. The crowd burst into shocked murmurs and uneasy laughter. Jack Morgan was still groaning against a car, clutching his ribs. Danny Wallace had vanished completely. Tyler lay still, a thin line of blood escaping from his split lip. Mark stood over his defeated enemy, breathing evenly. He felt no joy, no victory, only a profound sadness that things had reached this point. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is he dead?" Mark knelt down and checked Tyler's pulse, strong and steady. "He is okay," he announced. "Just knocked out. He'll wake up in a few minutes with a headache and a lesson learned." Rising, he faced the remaining students. "Does anyone else want to challenge me?" he asked quietly. The crowd quickly started to break up, students rushing away to share the story of what they had just seen. Within moments, only a few remained. Sarah Martinez stepped forward with hesitation. "Mark, are you okay?" she asked gently. He looked at her, this sweet girl who had tried to warn him earlier. "I'm fine," he replied, "but I'm not the same person I was this morning." Tyler began to move, groaning softly as he began to regain consciousness. Mark helped him sit up, ignoring the boy's instinctive recoil. "Listen to me carefully," Mark said in a voice both gentle and resolute. "This is the end of it. No retaliation, no revenge, no more bullying anyone. You will leave me alone. You will leave everyone else alone, and you will remember this feeling the next time you consider picking on someone weaker than you." Tyler nodded slowly, unable to meet Mark's gaze. And Mark added, "If I hear that you bother Mrs. Rodriguez or any other teacher, if I hear that you harass any other students, we will have this conversation again, but next time, I won't be so gentle." By Monday morning, the story had spread throughout Westfield High like wildfire. Mark arrived to find students watching him with a mix of awe and caution. The quiet kid who had been the victim had transformed completely. Tyler returned to school with a bruised jaw and a completely changed attitude. He avoided Mark entirely, kept his head down during classes, and seemed to have lost all desire for conflict. Jack and Danny followed his example, and their group slowly disbanded. Mrs. Rodriguez found Mark before first period. "I heard. What happened?" she asked softly. "Thank you for standing up for me." "You stood up for yourself," Mark replied. "I just finished what you started," she smiled. "But I still appreciate it. And Mark, if you ever need someone to talk to about what you can do, I am here." Mark Dalton nodded with gratitude. It was reassuring to realize he was not completely isolated. The transformation happened swiftly and deeply. Students who had never once noticed him now greeted him with respect in the corridors. Teachers began treating him with newfound regard. The invisible wall that had enclosed him for months broke apart entirely. Yet, the most important shift occurred within Mark himself. He stopped lowering his gaze or trying to be unseen. He moved with steady assurance, confident that he could face whatever challenges arose. He kept his promise to his mother. He would avoid seeking out conflict or becoming someone he despised, but he would refuse to be a victim again. 3 weeks later, Tyler Brooks approached him after classes. Mark tensed, prepared for anything. However, Tyler's stance was humble and remorseful. "I wanted to say sorry," Tyler spoke softly. "Really? Apologize? What I did to Mrs. Rodriguez, what I did to you, it was wrong. I was wrong." Mark examined the larger boy's expression for any hint of dishonesty. Instead, he saw only sincere regret. "Apology accepted," Mark responded at last. "But Tyler, this does not mean we are friends. It simply means we are even." Tyler nodded in understanding. "I get it. And Mark, I am not the only one who learned something that day. Half the school saw the consequences of pushing someone too far. You probably stopped many other kids from getting hurt." As Tyler walked away, Mark felt a quiet strength within himself, knowing things had changed forever. Mark Dalton pondered the meaning behind those words. At times, violence was not the solution, yet there were moments when it became the sole way bullies would comprehend a lesson. The crucial part lay in recognizing when to stand firm and when to simply avoid confrontation. His mother had been accurate in warning that violence often led to more violence, but she had been mistaken in another respect. In certain situations, one rightful act of force could actually stop a larger wave of aggression from occurring later on. The tormentors assumed he was just another victim until they crossed a boundary and discovered his dangerous secret. Mark Dalton kept his gaze down as he walked through the crowded hallway of Westfield High, clutching his worn leather messenger bag tightly against his chest. At 17, he was barely 5 feet 6 inches tall with a slender build that made him look younger than his actual age. His dark hair fell over his forehead, partially hiding the calm intelligence shining in his brown eyes. 3 months had elapsed since his family relocated from Montreal to this small town in Pennsylvania, and Mark still felt like an outsider in unfamiliar surroundings. The corridors buzzed with the usual teenage excitement, yet Mark moved through it almost like an invisible shadow. His accent, faint but distinct, marked him as different. His tendency to keep to himself and spend lunch breaks reading made him an easy target for bullies. What none of his peers realized was that Mark had spent the past 8 years training in mixed martial arts with some of the most respected masters in Quebec. His father, a former military man, had insisted on this discipline after Mark was hospitalized following a vicious attack at the age of 9. The control, the discipline, the deadly precision. It was all there, well concealed beneath his quiet demeanor. Yet Mark had promised his mother after their move that there would be no more fighting, no more violence. She had witnessed too much of what her son was capable of, and it filled her with fear. Violence only. She had whispered through tears that violence only breeds more violence after Mark Dalton had landed 3 teenagers in the hospital back in Montreal. He promised to change his ways and seek a different path. That determination, however, was challenged every day by Tyler Bennett and his gang. Tyler was 6 feet 2 inches tall with broad shoulders that revealed countless hours spent in the gym. His sandy hair was always immaculately styled, while his green eyes shone with a cold cunning that made him especially threatening. He ruled Westfield High by fear and instantly singled Mark out as a target. Jake Morgan acted as Tyler's right hand, shorter yet sturdier, with a face permanently twisted into a sneer. The third member, Danny Walsh, was lanky and anxious, driven more by fear than true cruelty. Together, they transformed Mark's life into a constant ordeal of humiliation. It began subtly with shove checks in hallway corridors that sent Mark crashing into lockers, accidentally dropping his books. Whispered insults about his accent followed, mockingly calling him Frenchie and refugee. Mark bore it all quietly, his jaw tight but his hands never retaliating. The cafeteria became one of the harshest battlegrounds. Westfield High's lunchroom spanned half the main building, lined with long tables that naturally divided students by social groups. Mark always chose to sit alone at a small table by the windows, wishing to stay unnoticed and blend into the background. However, Tyler's group had different intentions. "Hey, Frenchie!" Tyler shouted one Tuesday afternoon, his voice echoing over the packed room. "Are you really going to finish that entire sandwich, or are you saving some for your mom back in Canada?" Laughter spread around nearby tables. Mark kept eating, eyes fixed on his book, but his grip on the sandwich tightened until his knuckles turned pale. "Stay calm," he told himself. "Mother is right. Violence won't solve anything." Jake moved closer, his shadow looming over Mark's table. "Tyler's talking to you, foreign kid. It's impolite not to respond." "Leave me alone," Mark whispered, the stress sharpening his accent. "Oh, he talks," Danny chuckled nervously. "What is that book about? How to surrender in French?" The joke fell flat. Yet Tyler grabbed the book anyway, flipping pages with false curiosity. "Advanced Physics," he read aloud. "Wow, Frenchie, no wonder you have no friends. You read this dull stuff for fun." Mark reached to take the book back, but Tyler lifted it high. "Give it here," Mark said, steady despite the growing anger in his chest. "I dare you." Tyler smirked, then intentionally dropped the book into Mark's chocolate milk. The liquid splashed all over the table, soaking Mark's notebook and dripping down his jeans. The cafeteria grew silent, dozens of eyes fixed on the scene. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch supervisor, was conveniently looking the other way. In another corner, deeply focused on her phone, Mark Dalton quietly observed his damaged possessions, his breathing deliberately steady. "This is exactly what they want," he thought to himself. "They want me to lose my composure." Yet Mark retrieved his soaked book with calmness and started tidying up the chaos around him. Tyler Bennett's group chuckled and walked away, disappointed by the lack of any outburst. However, Mark noticed a disturbing look in Tyler's eyes, a hunger for satisfaction that remained unfulfilled. The torment was far from over. It seemed the bully craved more. The harassment intensified during the weeks that followed. In gym class, Mark discovered his clothes torn and stuffed into his locker. After school, on his walk to the car, he found all 4 tires had been cut. The school officials showed an irritating level of indifference, dismissing each episode as a mere prank rather than acknowledging a pattern of bullying. "Boys will be boys," Principal Davidson had said with an indifferent wave when Mark's father came to complain. "Mark needs to learn to fit in better. Maybe he should engage more with school activities." Mark's father left that meeting furious, but Mark persuaded him against making the situation worse. "I can handle this," he assured, though deep down he questioned how much more torment he could endure. The final straw appeared one Thursday morning during Mrs. Rodriguez's advanced biology lesson. She was a young woman, likely in her late 20s, with long dark hair and a love for teaching that had made her popular among students. She wore a modest skirt that reached her knees and a blouse, embodying professionalism that made the classroom feel welcoming and respectful. Mark Dalton had always valued her warmth. She was among the rare instructors who appeared to sincerely care about his transition to the new school. The classroom was situated on the 2nd floor of the science building, featuring large windows that faced the parking area. Mrs. Rodriguez stood at the front, writing chemical equations on the whiteboard when Tyler Bennett decided to act. "Look at this," Tyler whispered to Jake Morgan, who was sitting 2 rows behind Mark. "Bet she's wearing something interesting beneath that skirt." Mark felt his stomach tighten. He had learned to identify that tone in Tyler's voice, the predatory pleasure that foretold his worst conduct. Mrs. Rodriguez had her back turned, reaching to write on the upper part of the board. Tyler rose slowly, making exaggerated silent gestures toward his friends. Several students noticed but remained silent, their faces filled with a mix of fear and anticipation. Tyler crept forward, phone already recording in hand. Jake followed with a foolish grin. Danny Walsh stayed seated, looking uneasy but unwilling to get involved. "Do something," Mark wished desperately. "But what? If I called him out, Tyler would just focus on me instead. If I said nothing, Mrs. Rodriguez would be shamed." Tyler reached the room's front and slowly stretched his hand toward the edge of Mrs. Rodriguez's skirt. The entire classroom held its breath. What the hell do you think? What do you think you are doing? Mrs. Rodriguez spun around just as Tyler's fingers barely touched the fabric. Her voice sliced through the classroom sharply. Her usual calm was replaced by fierce anger. Tyler froze, hands still outstretched, his phone still recording. You were just sexually harassing your teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted, her voice dangerously low. Hand over that phone this instant. No way, Tyler smirked, regaining his confidence. You have no proof. Besides, what are you going to do? You are only a teacher. That was his error. Mrs. Rodriguez moved swiftly, grabbing Tyler's wrist. The phone slipped from his grip, crashing across the floor. Tyler tried to pull free, but found himself caught in an unyielding hold. Let me go, you crazy! Mrs. Rodriguez twisted Tyler's arm firmly behind him and pushed his face down onto the nearest desk. The sound echoed loudly in the silent room. Tyler cried out, startled and hurting. Anyone else want to try something? She asked casually, pressing her knee into his back as he struggled uselessly. Jake, you were filming as well, weren't you? Jake went pale, his own phone shaking in his hands. We were just... Mrs. Rodriguez released Tyler, who stumbled backward, clutching his arm. Her eyes burned with fierce determination. All three of you get out of my classroom now and don't even think about coming back until you've learned your lesson. To treat women with dignity. Tyler's face burned with a mix of embarrassment and fury. Everyone in the classroom had seen him defeated by a woman half his stature. As he gathered his scattered items, his gaze landed on Mark Dalton. This is your fault somehow, he muttered angrily. After school, Frenchie's parking lot, you and me. Mark felt a strange sensation in his chest. The strict control he had kept for many months began to crumble. Tyler's threat was no longer only about him. Mrs. Rodriguez had stood her ground, displayed true bravery, and now Tyler wanted to vent his humiliation on the one person he believed was powerless to resist. He was mistaken about that. The remainder of the day passed in a haze. Mark struggled to focus on his lessons, his thoughts swirling with potential outcomes and dangers. He thought about avoiding the confrontation, leaving school early, or asking for a ride home. He also considered reporting Tyler's threat to the school authorities, although their history implied little action would follow. Alternatively, he could finally teach Tyler Bennett precisely who he was dealing with. When the last bell rang, Mark did not rush to the exits like the other students. Instead, he calmly walked to his locker without hurry. He took out his heavy textbooks, leaving only his notebook and pen behind. His actions felt altered now, more smooth and intentional. The change was subtle but clear to anyone observant. Sarah Martinez, a quiet girl from his chemistry class, paused at the locker next to his. Mark. She spoke hesitantly. Tyler and his friends are waiting outside. Maybe you should contact your parents or something, she added. Mark looked at her, really looked at her for the very first time. Her eyes were gentle and her concern seemed sincere. Thanks, he replied simply. But I believe it's time I face this on my own. Sarah frowned. What do you mean, Mark? Tyler's large figure appeared. He will hurt you. A slight smile appeared at the edges of Mark's mouth. I don't think so. He strolled through the school's main hallways one last time as someone who had been a victim. Students hurried past in the usual after-school bustle, but many had caught wind of Tyler's warning. News spread quickly in a small school, and a crowd was already gathering outside. The parking area stretched behind the main building, enclosed by a chain-link fence and watched over by the gym windows. This was the usual place to settle disputes, hidden enough from the main offices to avoid immediate administrative action, but exposed enough to guarantee witnesses. Tyler waited near the center of the lot with Jake and Danny standing by his sides. About 30 students formed a loose circle, keeping enough space to scatter if teachers came, yet close enough to observe everything. Mark noticed Mrs. Rodriguez's car still parked in the faculty lot and wondered if she was aware of what was about to unfold. There he is, Tyler. Mark Dalton was called out as he neared. The small French coward who hides behind women. Mark moved forward steadily, his arms relaxed at his sides, his breathing steady, his mind focused. 8 years of training had taught him to remain calm amidst the chaos. "You embarrassed me today, Frenchie," Tyler Bennett shouted, his voice growing louder for the crowd around them. "You made me look like a weakling in front of everyone. That was a grave error." Mark halted about 10 feet away, close enough to strike at any moment. "I did nothing to you, Tyler. You humiliated yourself." Tyler's expression darkened. "Smart mouth. Let us see how smart you are once I finish with you." Suddenly, Tyler lunged forward, throwing a wild, careless punch aimed at Mark's head. It was exactly the uncoordinated and obvious attack that Mark had been trained to counter since his very first month of practice. Mark dodged the blow with barely any movement, letting Tyler's own force carry him past. As the larger boy stumbled onward, Mark drove his elbow hard into Tyler's side. Tyler gasped sharply and staggered, pain shooting through his lower back. The crowd went silent. This was no fluke. Tyler spun around, his face a mix of fury and disbelief. "Lucky strike," he growled, though the anger in his voice was weak. He rushed once more carefully this time, throwing a sequence of jabs. Mark flowed like water, each punch gliding past him without harm. He had the chance to finish it then, could have acted decisively. Tyler was never brought down by any number of fierce counterattacks. Instead, Marcus allowed the aggressor to wear himself out, proving how pointless his strikes were. Jake, noticing his leader struggling, decided to step in. He charged at Mark from the side, aiming to catch him unprepared. Mark reacted quickly and with great force. He caught Jake's momentum perfectly and executed a flawless hip toss, using the boy's own energy to slam him onto the pavement. Jake rolled twice before resting against a parked vehicle, groaning in pain. "Stay down," Mark said softly, his gaze never leaving Tyler. Danny glanced at his friends and immediately stepped back, raising his hands. "I'm out," he said quickly. "This is your fight." Tyler was now breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead. For the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. "This isn't going as planned," he muttered. "What exactly are you?" he gasped. Mark began to circle like a predator, his movements calm and calculated. "I'm someone who has been very patient with you, Tyler. Someone who has given you countless chances to leave me alone. Someone whose mother made him promise not to harm people." Tyler threw another punch, desperation making his movements careless. Mark caught his wrist, twisted it, and drove his knee into Tyler's solar plexus. The larger boy bent over, gagging. "But you just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" Mark said conversationally, still holding Tyler's arm firmly. "You had to keep pushing, had to humiliate Mrs. Rodriguez had to threaten me." He twisted Tyler's arm further, pressing painfully on the shoulder joint. Tyler cried out and dropped down onto one knee. Mark Dalton spoke up, his voice ringing clearly across the quiet parking lot. "I have trained in mixed martial arts since I was 9 years old. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling. 8 years, 6 days a week, 3 hours every day. I have competed in competitions throughout Canada and the northern parts of the United States. I have never lost a match." Tyler's eyes grew wide with fear, finally grasping how serious his mistake was. Mark continued. "The last 3 guys who tried to bully me ended up in the hospital. One had a broken jaw, another suffered 3 cracked ribs. The third dislocated his shoulder and had a concussion." Mark paused briefly before adding, "That is why my family decided to move here. That is why I promised my mother I would stop fighting." He then released Tyler's arm and stepped backward. Tyler fell completely to the ground, holding his shoulder and struggling to breathe. "But you had to push it," Mark said with voice filled with disappointment. "You could not just leave me alone. You had to drag Mrs. Rodriguez into it. You had to make it personal." Tyler forced himself to stand, his face pale and crushed. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I did not know. I will leave you alone. I promise." Mark looked at him for a long moment as the crowd around them watched with a mix of fascination and fear. This quiet boy, this target, they had all seen being tormented for so long. After several months, Mark Dalton had just effortlessly taken down the school's most dreaded bully. "You are not sorry yet," Mark finally said, "but you will be." He moved with sudden, explosive force, his fist landing perfectly on Tyler Bennett's jaw with a solid right cross. The sound of impact reverberated through the parking lot like a gunshot. Tyler's head jerked backward, his eyes rolled upward, and he collapsed unconscious onto the asphalt. The crowd broke into shocked whispers mixed with uneasy laughter. Jake Morgan was still groaning while leaning against a car, clutching his ribs. Danny Walsh had vanished entirely. Tyler lay still, a thin stream of blood dripping from his split lip. Mark stood over his defeated adversary, breathing evenly. He felt no satisfaction or victory, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Someone from the crowd whispered, "Is he dead?" Mark knelt down and checked Tyler's pulse. It was steady and strong. "He's okay," he called out, "just knocked out. He will wake up in a few minutes with a headache and a lesson." Rising to his feet, he faced the watching students. "Does anyone else have a problem with me?" he asked quietly. Gradually, the crowd began to disperse quickly, students hurrying away to share what they had just seen. Within moments, only a small group remained. Sarah Martinez approached him cautiously. "Mark, are you all right?" she asked. He looked at her, this kind girl who had tried to warn him earlier. "I am okay," he replied, "but I am not the same person I was this morning." Meanwhile, Tyler started to stir, groaning softly. Mark helped him sit upright, ignoring the boy's natural flinch. "Listen to me closely," Mark said, his tone gentle yet resolute. "This stops right here. No retaliation, no revenge, no more bullying anyone. You will leave me alone. You will leave everyone else alone. And you will remember this feeling the next time you even consider picking on someone smaller than you." Tyler gave a feeble nod, unable to hold Mark's gaze. And Mark added, "If I find out you are troubling Mrs. Rodriguez or any other teacher, if I hear you are bothering other students again, we will have this conversation once more, but next time, I will not be so gentle." By Monday morning, the story had spread through Westfield High like wildfire. Mark arrived to find students watching him with a mix of admiration and fear. The quiet boy who had been the victim was now something entirely different. Tyler came back to school with a bruised jaw and a completely changed attitude. He avoided Mark entirely, kept his eyes low in class, and seemed to have lost any desire for confrontation. Jake and Danny followed his example and their group effectively dissolved. Mrs. Rodriguez found Mark before the first period. I heard her say softly, "What happened?" She added quietly, "Thank you for standing up for me." "You stood up for yourself," Mark replied. "I just finished what you started," she smiled. "Still, I am grateful. And Mark, if you ever need someone to talk to about what you can do next, I am here." Mark Dalton nodded with gratitude. It was reassuring to realize he was not entirely alone. The transformation was swift and profound. Students who had previously ignored him now greeted him with respect in the corridors. Teachers treated him with newfound regard. The invisible wall that had enclosed him for months had completely disappeared. Yet the most important change was within Mark himself. He no longer kept his gaze lowered or tried to go unnoticed. Instead, he walked with quiet assurance, confident he could face whatever challenges arose. He had promised his mother he would avoid violence and never become like those he despised, but he refused to ever be anyone's target again. 3 weeks later, Tyler Bennett approached him after class. Mark stiffened, bracing for anything. However, Tyler's body language was subdued, even defeated. "I wanted to say sorry," Tyler said softly. "Really? Apologize? For what I did to Mrs. Rodriguez and to you? That was wrong. I was wrong." Mark carefully examined the older boy's expression, searching for any sign of deceit. Instead, he saw only sincere regret. "Your apology is accepted," Mark finally replied. "But Tyler, this does not mean we are friends. It only means we are even." Tyler nodded, acknowledging the truth. "I get it. And Mark, I am not the only one who learned something that day. Half the school witnessed what happens when you push someone too far. You probably stopped a lot of other kids from getting hurt." As Tyler walked away, Mark Dalton pondered the meaning behind those words. At times, aggression was not the solution, yet in certain situations, it was the sole way bullies could comprehend. The challenge lay in discerning the moments to stand firm and the moments to retreat. His mother had warned him that violence only leads to more violence, but there was another truth she had missed. Occasionally, one justified action of force could stop much greater conflict from happening later on.